Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Clint O'Brien, Associate Director of Planning and Innovation at CEDA. Welcome to the CEDA Forum, The Future of Australia's Higher Education Sector, in which we'll examine Australia's higher education institutions and the important economic and social contribution they make to our nation, and to consider the future of the sector. Some of CEDA's program of discussion and forums have moved, like many, to an online platform. As we slowly return to business as usual, CEDA will return to face-to-face events, but will continue a robust program of live stream discussions to allow people from all corners of the country to participate and to inform, promote, debate of critical issues. To the range of events and discussions on the most important issues impacting Australia's economic and social development, we encourage you to visit CEDA's website, www.ceda.com.au, where you'll also be able to register for upcoming events and view videos of previous CEDA live streams. CEDA also produces regular podcasts and video interviews and blogs with leading experts and policymakers to ensure you can remain up to date with quality information on key issues impacting the economy and more broadly in key sectors such as health and resources. Today, like at CEDA public events, you'll still be able to interact with our speakers through the Q&A portal, which is available via the link and below on your video screen. You can enter the details by going to ceda.pigeonhole.at and using the passcode education. You can also join the conversation on Twitter by using today's hashtag, which is highered, and by tagging CEDA News at CEDA_news. CEDA acknowledges today and every day that we meet on Aboriginal land. Committed to recognition and reconciliation, we pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging, and support their stated aspirations. Wherever you're joining us from today, you're joining us from Aboriginal land. I'd like to thank and acknowledge the Nous Group and UniSuper for their sponsorship of today's CEDA Forum. These two organisations have long worked with CEDA on this area, and it's great to be working with you again on it. All of you, all 1,300 of you from all across the country and right across sectors, and to our speakers who are joining us from across the country as well. The Honourable Dan Tehan, MP, Federal Minister for Education, Professor Attila Brungs, Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Technology, Sydney, Professor Margaret Gardner AC, Chair of the Group of 8 Universities and President and Vice-Chancellor of Monash University, and Catriona Jackson, Chief Executive Officer of Universities Australia. Thank you all for making the time today. And all of those will now be introduced properly by Tim Morton, our Chair of today's discussion and the Managing Director of the Nous Group. Thanks very much, Tim.
Thank you, Clint, and welcome. I share my welcome to all of you who have joined this event. 1,300 of you have joined to obviously be part of what's a critical discussion for Australia's future. And on behalf of Nous Group and UniSuper, I'm delighted that we've had the opportunity to join again with the Minister, with the higher education sector, and with CEDA in providing this event for you. Perhaps a little bit of background. This sector has been an outstanding performer over the last 30 years. And let me just give you some data over the last 15 years. The number of students, the number of domestic students has grown on average 2.7% per year over each of the last 15 years on average. International students have grown 5.5% a year on average. And revenue has grown at 5% in real terms. Those numbers are numbers that would outstrip almost any other sector in Australia. Importantly, of course, this sector is not just a sector of economic growth, it's a sector of much broader contribution, which you'd all recognise as well. And I think what's been really significant is that if you count the top 15 years ago, 14 universities in Australia in the top 200, including Monash University and University of Technology, Sydney, and their average ranking, global ranking, was 180. Today, that global ranking is 108. So the universities that are in the top 14 have moved up 80 places. Can you imagine if that had happened to our tennis players or any of the other areas in which we operate? It's an extraordinary success. But to add to the numbers for a moment, Nous Group works with around 30 universities here in Australia, around 20 in the UK where we operate, and more recently with 5 universities in Canada. And I can say with absolute confidence, working with clients in Canada and the UK, they all look to Australian universities for leadership and for where the sector is going. So I think they'll be watching with great interest in our discussion about the future of higher education, because I know the last 20 years, we've been the leading university sector, certainly in the Anglo world, and I suspect in the world more generally. As Clint has said, we've got a really star-studded panel today, and let me introduce them. Firstly, the Honourable Dan Tehan, MP, who's the Federal Minister for Education. Minister, delighted to have you here. Catriona Jackson, the Chief Executive Officer for Universities Australia. Welcome, Catriona. Professor Margaret Gardner, AC, who's the Chair of the Group of 8 Australia and President and Vice-Chancellor of Monash University. Welcome, Margaret. Professor Attila Brungs, who's the Vice-Chancellor and President of the University of Technology, Sydney, and the Chair of the Australian Technology Network. This really is a panel that can help us think deeply about the future of higher education in Australia. And with that, by way of introduction, Minister Dan Tehan, can I ask you to make the opening address, and then we'll work through in the order in which I've introduced our speakers. Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks for your sponsorship of this event. And can I also acknowledge Catriona, Margaret, and Attila, and it's great to be joining you today for the panel discussion, which will follow after our presentations. Can I just start by saying that the future is bright for the Australian higher education system. There are currently challenges, and they're large challenges, but the foundations on which the sector is built on are very, very solid, and I think the sector has a very, very bright future. This year has been a year like no other. It was, I think, about 7.5 months ago when I was in a paddock in Lexington, in the northern part of my electorate, with the head of the International Student Association, repairing fences so that we could send a message out to the broader international student community saying that even though we'd had devastating bushfires in Australia, Australia was a safe place to come and study. And as a matter of fact, you could come and study in Australia and help the nation repair the damage that had been wrought by the bushfires. And doing that work, I received a phone call summoning me to go to Melbourne because there was an important cabinet meeting which was taking place that afternoon. And for the first time, we realised the potential impact that the COVID-19 was potentially could have on the globe and on our nation. And that obviously has presented since then an enormous amount of challenges across many sectors, but including the higher education sector. And in large part, it has led to us responding to ensure that we will have a very successful higher education system into the future. So what did the government do to ensure that we put ballast into the sector this year? Well, the first thing we did was underpin our funding for domestic students by guaranteeing $18 billion to the sector this year, and by making it very clear it wouldn't matter what happened with regards to domestic student load, that the sector would be guaranteed that $18 billion of funding. We also sought to move quickly on reforms that we've been looking at by introducing micro-credentialed courses, short courses, and we now have 55 providers providing courses in 300-400 different areas in micro-credentials or short courses. It's in the Australian qualifications framework now till the end of 2021, and the government's aim is to cement micro-credentials or short courses into the AQF forever, given the success that we've already seen from the sector in taking up those micro-credentials. And what we also saw from the sector itself is its professionalism, its ability to innovate, and its ability to meet a challenge. The way it was able to move seamlessly to conducting courses online, tutorials online, and making sure that the day-to-day practices that were required from a university were still able to continue through COVID-19, I think really did show how much of a world-leading sector we have here in Australia in our higher education sector. But it just wasn't on the domestic front that we saw the challenges. We were able to, through working very closely with our border officials ensure that we got over 80% of our international students in this year. And that was incredibly important, and a lot of time and effort went into that because there is a real understanding of the importance of the international student market makes to our nation. For every 3 international students that come in, 1 job is created domestically. 250,000 jobs all up are there as a result of our international student market. $40 billion in national income in 2019 as a result of our international student market. So we were able to get 80% of the international students into Australia this year, but the challenge as COVID-19 has continued, and particularly we've seen the second wave in Victoria, is what will the international student market look like next year and the year after? National Cabinet has agreed that we will try and get pilots up and running as soon as possible. But obviously with internal border restrictions and with caps on returning Australians coming back to the nation, we have to work through some of those issues before we can commence those pilots. But South Australia, the Northern Territory are very keen to work with the Commonwealth Government to get those pilots going as quickly as possible. But without those international students, what we've also learned is the cross-subsidisation that was going on from that international student market into our research capability has been struck a real blow, and one that will require us to ensure that we can continue to underpin research in this nation. And that's why the government has set up a joint working group with a group of Vice-Chancellors to see how we can do this, understanding that research will very much lead us on our economic recovery out of COVID-19. It's played a key role in helping us deal with the pandemic, in helping us be able to provide both a medical expert advice, but also modelling and in other areas for us to be able to deal with COVID-19 and continue to deal with COVID-19. But also we know in terms of creating new industries, new technologies and driving the nation out of the pandemic, research is going to be absolutely vital. So that is why at the moment, from the government's point of view, we have very much a two-pronged approach to the future of the higher education sector. One is we now know, sadly, that youth unemployment is going to grow and is growing as a result of the pandemic. And that means that we need to open up more places when it comes to higher education. That's why our job-ready graduate legislation, which is before the Parliament at the moment, will create an additional up to 20,000 places next year and over 100,000 additional places in the years to come. It will also create stronger linkages between universities and industry, something else that we see as absolutely vital to ensuring we grow our economy out of this pandemic. And it's also why we are looking at what we need to do to ensure that we have the investments that are required to help our research sector while we wait for the international student market to recover. So it's been quite a challenging year. I don't think any of us expected to be confronting what we did in the higher education space. But my view is by putting more domestic places into the sector, by creating stronger linkages between industry and making sure that we have that ballast in our research capability, then we will be able to ensure that the sector will be one of the drivers as we come out of this COVID-19 pandemic. And it needs to be one of the drivers because the future of our nation, given the shape of our economy, the reliance we have on services to drive economic growth, having a higher education system which can produce the students that we need, the technology that we need and the know-how that we need is going to be absolutely vital. So I'll leave it there, Tim, and happy to take questions after we hear from the rest of the panellists.
Good. Thank you very much, Minister, and I look forward to the discussion. Catriona Jackson, Chief Executive, Universities Australia, if you could make your opening remarks, please. Thank you, Catriona.
Thank you very much, Tim. And Minister, I think about the time you were standing in that paddock, possibly a couple of weeks separate, I was standing in the Bateman's Bay Bushfire Refuge Centre being run by the University of Wollongong. We had a conversation not too far from that day about the extraordinary contribution universities were making during that crisis. Now we're talking about another one. It's been a big year. Universities, as you've highlighted, are an extraordinary success story. We did not change at the start of this year. COVID did. Universities have been hard hit, as have all organisations that depend on the free flow of people. We also depend fundamentally on the free flow of ideas. Ideas can cross borders, but at the moment, people can't, and that's a very serious problem for us. The slow, careful and clear-eyed decision to build an international student industry here, to build something that is of enormous value to the nation, has been something university leaders and government have done together for decades. There has been very careful work to share the extraordinary wealth we have in our higher education system with the region around us and further afield. I'm looking at Attila and Margaret as people who've been fundamentally involved in that process. This brings us extraordinary wealth, both in dollar terms, but I'll talk for a moment about the cultural wealth. It means that children like mine, who'll be in universities quite soon, children who are in universities now, sit next to people from all around the country, 144 countries. It means they get the kind of education, they become the kinds of global citizens that we could only, us in the room who are not 17 or 18, could only have dreamed of when we attended university. It's an experience which is like no other, and something I think we and the rest of Australia should be enormously proud of. Right now, it's very difficult to do that because people simply can't get here. But I think it's something which is not fully recognised and something that needs to be understood by the broader Australian community. And I think everyone who has a kid in university understands the value of this extraordinarily internationalised experience. There's been, as I said, sustained support from government. There's been a whole of government strategy, in fact, to support international education. And this has developed, as we know, the centre of gravity of the world's middle class is shifting to Asia and continues to do so. There are real opportunities for us here, COVID notwithstanding, once we get through this nasty, nasty bump. International education, as you've said, Minister, is our nation's fourth largest export industry after iron ore, coal, natural gas, $40 billion into the economy every year. Less than half of that goes to universities. Every cent that goes to universities, of course, goes into teaching and research, but more than half of that money goes straight into the Australian economy. So is spent by families, by students who are here, accommodation, a huge range of services, go into any major metropolitan centre or regional centre now, and you'll see the gap that is there because those students aren't here. We've been talking to major accommodation providers, pretty much every part of the economy, which is genuinely suffering from the absence of those students who physically can't get here. Again, as you pointed out, Minister, there was an enormous effort to get as many students as we could here. What universities are now looking to is how well we'll do in second semester. Partly, we're talking about the brutal realisation from students and their families that they will not be able to get to Australia or other locations. Also, the fact that they know that online is working. Universities have performed an extraordinary feat in transferring courses online across hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, in fact, thousands of disciplines virtually overnight. Students have also been extraordinarily adaptable and patient and innovative in getting used to what is a very different way of learning for almost all of them. For a large number, they're sticking with us, but inevitably in second semester, the time when many international students join us, some of them are not joining us, and that obviously hits the bottom line very hard. These numbers will be familiar to everyone here, and I'm assuming to those some thousands who are listening today, but this creates a very serious revenue problem for universities. We're staring down the barrel of a loss of 21,000 staff this year. That's full-time equivalent staff. That's something that it would be very difficult for any sector to be able to bear. In terms of revenue, between $3.1 billion and $4.8 billion this year alone, And our really big problem is it's not a 1 year problem for us. It's a 2, 3, 4 year problem. Over 4 years, we predict, and these are pretty conservative predictions, that $16 billion will be the loss to the bottom line of universities. But look, let's not all be doom and gloom. We know there is a very serious challenge ahead of us, but universities are extraordinarily adaptable and creative institutions. With the assistance of government, we are vital to national recovery. I don't think I need to say that without research, without the innovation that stems from research, we cannot have the sort of recovery that every Australian deserves, and universities are standing tall, absolutely ready to assist, working with government in getting the best recovery we possibly can.
Thank you very much, Catriona Jackson. Let me now introduce Professor Margaret Gardner from Monash Uni. Margaret, delighted to hear your opening remarks, please.
Okay, thank you, Tim, and thank you, Minister. Let me try to focus less on international education and perhaps more on research, given the fulsome discussion we've had of international education. Let me just emphasise the circumstances we're in. We all recognise the major global impact of the COVID pandemic, which has done two things. It has fundamentally changed the way we operate, and that is as true of universities as any other organisation. It has fundamentally changed everything we do at present. And the question about that is what the extent of those changes will be in the way we transform for the future, because there's a tendency, a natural human tendency to say, yes, there's a big change, but we will go back to normal, which is meant what it was before. I think we've seen a fundamental change in the way we operate, which has within it the harbingers of future changes. We've also heard the discussion of the impact on revenue, and that's quite not an unusual thing to discuss, because it affects the actual quality and the extent to which you can operate, and not inappropriate for a discussion in economic development. But I want to talk about how we actually have to understand that revenue as part of the way we operate. And I just want to say a couple of things. What I'm going to talk about is what we can do and what's important to assist us for what we can do for the future. I need to say we've already done, and the things about what universities have done, and I just want to be really quite quick about them, is that they are actually potentially hugely empowering for universities in terms of what has been achieved and what therefore can be achieved in the future. I'm not sure that the lessons of what has been done are fully understood in what I think should be the way we understand our role in the future. I'm talking across the community, and probably not even entirely inside ourselves yet. The transformation is not just in the way we operate. What have we done? Yes, we actually moved online. We embraced the virtual and the digital in a range of things, not just education, but in the way we conducted all our transactions, that have shown new ways of organising ourselves and seeing how we might operate, not just where we are now, but into the future and where else we might be. We've also shown the sort of resilience and flexibility of organisations that have actually built up, and thank you for the praise from Tim and the Minister about the building, for example, of the international education sector, because Australian universities, compared to many around the world, leaving aside private universities with their, slightly separate circumstances, when we look at the major group of Australian universities, they're public. Compared to public universities, are actually much bigger generators of their own future in terms of the way they interact with the world. So if you're in most public universities, it's a bit like being in a high school. A budget comes from government. What universities did in the face of this major impact was actually reshaped all their financial operations at great speed. People, despite some of the media commentary, people had reserves, they used them. People had borrowing capacity. Most of us have have credit ratings and they use them. People looked at how they spent money and rejigged money and changed priorities. These are the elements of a type of resilience and independence that I think we have to recognise was helpful. So what we did do shows us something about what we can do and therefore how we could understand in the future. So what can we do? And how might that interact with government in the future? We can completely expand our education offerings because of what we've been able to do digitally, not just in our traditional undergraduate and postgraduate and in our research degrees, but in that whole space that will be very important in this recovery of not just postgraduate, but continuing and professional education. There is a huge resource and we have shown ourselves what we can do. We have a major challenge to research because the economy of this country does not, in the way it's structured, provide the sort of research funding from industry that is enough for the quality and scale of what Australian universities can do, something that they've supported from other revenue sources. So we have a challenge as a country in how we engage our research funding with industry for the future, both to draw industry towards us and to build new industries out off that very significant and highly internationally capable research base. To do that, we have to hold our concentrations of excellence because Australia built them up quite substantially over the last decade. They are sitting on the revenue that just flew out the window, but they are resources that are enormously important. And so the discussions that the Minister referred to that are going on and are actually going on, I think I'm allowed to say this, entirely consensually and with great thought inside the group. The culmination of those discussions and the sitting behind them, that's important to taking that capacity forward. Now, what I need to say is, as the Minister has said, we can really do a lot. Australian universities are large on average. The Australian economy is made up of small and medium-sized businesses and is very heavily focused where it's at scale in a small number of industries. One of the industries where it is at huge scale and international quality is higher education, as the Minister has said. The thing we have to do is change the way we think of it. I find sometimes a tension in the way it is discussed between almost a mindset that says these are government entities funded by government. If you understand that they are, we're talking public universities, statutory authorities, yes, but they are like, therefore, government business enterprises, and they are fundamentally highly successful, if you thought of philanthropy, social enterprises. If we saw the sector in those terms and thought about the settings in that space, we would think about them differently. We would think about how our regulatory settings, and we've done this very well, I might say, in Australia's quality assurance regime, how they are proportionate and risk-based and enable those large, capable organisations to succeed in that broad mission that they have. So we would think empowering and light touch on regulation. If we understood them in that frame, as opposed to reverting, as I say, to the large high school mental space, we would see how research and its building is fundamental to our economic future, and why, like investing in energy, we have to invest in that research because that's what will drive that energy. If Australia's going to have a hydrogen industry, and I think we can, then we're going to be a big part of the engine, and you want to give us what it takes to do that. So this is about what is it that we need. There's what we can do. What we need is two things around that. We need an understanding of what we are able to do that puts the settings, both regulatory and in terms of government support, in the right frame. And we need a culture. It's been balm to my heart to hear what Tim and the Minister has said. If we understand the organisations and what they can do in that frame, then we see that we are investing in our future. We see that they can take our investment and invest it wisely. We see that they can double and triple it because that's what they've done already. And in that, we put a culture around them that says what those institutions can do as large, innovative, entrepreneurial, social enterprises, government business enterprises, is what we should be building in Australia. And that's the funding setting, and that's the regulatory setting, and that's what our future should bring.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And for our final opening comments, let's go to Professor Attila Brungs, Vice-Chancellor and President of UTS. Thank you, Attila.
Thank you, Tim, and good afternoon, everyone. As you heard from the Minister right up, the university sector in Australia is high quality, has excellent foundations. But for the future, that's not enough. We need to leverage this to tackle the challenges and opportunities that our country has. We need to partner in very different ways across universities, business and government to really drive what I see one of the key things to help us in our recovery, which is a skills and innovation agenda right across the country. It'll help build back our national prosperity. As well as being a great disruptor, COVID-19 has also proved to be an accelerator of many of the changes we already saw taking place in our wider society and economy. The global trend towards requiring increased ongoing education and skill development post your secondary school has really intensified. Our countries need to transition to a lifetime of learning where people require new skills throughout their whole lives and careers hasn't gone away. In fact, it's accelerated and become more critical than ever given its drive of our economic recovery now. UTS and all the other universities, of course, increasing the evolution of our learning models to respond. We're driving new approaches, including, the Minister spoke about micro-credentials, short courses to support massive retraining and upskilling requirements for Australia, to get people back into work, to enable business workforces to respond to post-COVID operating environments, and actually critically, to try and create new jobs. So what will the future of the university sector look like? And I'll paint just a few things. Firstly, as a sector, we're responding by supporting the next generation of what we call job-ready graduates. These graduates are not just ready for the first job, or even the first few jobs, but a multiplicity of jobs. Individuals who, with a foundation of critical thinking, problem-solving, creativity, augmented with specific skills, will now have an underlying capacity and resilience to transition dozens of times throughout their careers, developing their capabilities almost continually through their lives. In terms of delivery, both Margaret and Catriona spoke about during the pandemic, universities have demonstrated we can deliver effective and high quality online teaching, which is great. But critically, what we find is a new hybrid model is optimal. And this will become more ubiquitous. New ways of combining online and face-to-face teaching, again, all the way through people's careers to give them the skills they need to drive economic prosperity. This also validates the approach many universities have been taking to our physical campuses. At UTS, for example, we've been on this journey for a number of years. We revitalised our campus and built not one lecture theatre and pulled out all the remaining ones. We've replaced them with spaces, all technologically enabled for debate, interaction, engagement, hands-on learning, but also a huge amount of space dedicated to startup and co-design. Similarly, across Western Sydney, we're not trying to focus on replicating old-fashioned walled campuses, but delivering education through some of our new partnerships with business, the community on TAFE, to get education in the workforce when it is needed at the right time to enable businesses to innovate. In the future, I see this lifelong interaction between individuals, workforces, businesses and educational institutions like universities will become the critical channel for innovation transfer to enable businesses to adapt, to enable businesses to take on new technologies and new research. So this will increase the importance of the connection between research, innovation and education at universities and their partners. In the past, I often had partners at universities who were focused on research and other partners with business who were focused on education. But the last few years, we've been an absolute blurring of the two. Innovation, research and education all as one piece. In the future, I see there'll be 4 pillars to support this lifetime of learning journey that I see that our country really needs to get the most out of what it can do. Universities, vet and TAFE, private providers and of course business. Now all of these have to function well and collaborate. My daughter, who's soon to leave school, will almost certainly have a very different path in education to me. She will probably get some qualifications from university and TAFE and her employer, and probably even private education throughout her life. And now I see strong evidence of the universities of TAFE, private providers, and also business evolving quite well, with some really excellent examples. But I do believe, particularly in the business space, this is fast enough. We really need to think differently about models of evolving this. I know this is challenging with COVID and all the challenges it has presented, but skills development needs to be thought about in the context of a solution and a way out of economic crisis, rather than a cost to be managed in a financial crisis. Facing us today, we have a future. None of us, no businesses, will always be able to simply recruit the staff with the exact skill sets we have in the past, due to the rate of technological change and other things. So we all need to collaborate to develop them, to get those skill sets we need to drive our economic growth. Now, you've heard already from, I think, all my colleagues, COVID has demonstrated the value of experts and research to our national response, and will start driving innovation to our recovery. Universities are also, again, we're rapidly evolving the way that we work with industry, government and community sector to transfer existing knowledge in R&D, technological enablement, and to support businesses what you do best, which is business innovation. In the future, I see much closer coupling between upskilling and reskilling, as I said, and tech transfer and adoption. And this will provide incredible opportunities for us as a country. One of the differentiators we have to be mindful of for universities is that university, of all the four pillars, is the only one where teaching is closely linked with cutting-edge research and knowledge generation. This characteristic of that coupling is going to be even more critical in our role in this whole system going into the future. Both now and into the future, we also need to continue to work with government to make sure we provide rigorous protection of our national interests when it comes to research collaboration. Research is a global business. So at the same time as maintaining our open approach to a global exchange of ideas and knowledge, we need to bring back to Australia the very best ideas, the very best technology and research all around the world, because we're too small a country to prosper otherwise, but do it in a way that understands the current geopolitical changes in a way that protects Australia's national interests as a priority. So in summary, I actually see coming up a revolution in how we partner. At UTS and many universities, we are now starting to see outstanding examples of enterprise learning partnerships with different parts of industry, big and small. We have collaboration with Telstra, which is a great example of upskilling whole sections of workforce and changing the underpinning technological enablement, as well as small companies, as well as startups. So, like the Minister, I think my colleagues, I'm incredibly positive that the sector will not just bounce back, but importantly, we'll deliver on our mission as public institutions to help lead Australia's economy out of its current recession and help prepare the workforce to take all these opportunities I see coming in a post-COVID world. But how well we can do this really depends on the decisions we make now. And these are decisions that are collectively across business, government and public institutions. So there are a lot of important conversations I think we need to have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Attila. And we'll now move to questions. And if my eyes go up to the right every now and again, that's because I'm reading the questions that have come in from all of the audience. But let me start with a question for Margaret and Attila, which is, you've mentioned quite a number of changes in the what might be called the business model or the operating model of universities. The most striking of those is the extraordinary rapid change in the learning and teaching modes that have occurred both over the last 5 years and then certainly over the last 5 months. Are there other significant changes coming? In particular, will universities become more or less international, both in terms of student flows and research engagement? There are clearly issues with respect to China that the government has alerted. So is there going to be changes in international? And secondly, will there be changes in the academic model? Will this need to be able to provide more places for students, as I understand it, not more funding, mean that there'll be less available for research? So two-part question, more international, less international, and how might the academic model change, please?
I might quickly start, Margaret, and I'll focus on perhaps the international. I'm not sure I'd say whether it's more or less international. One of the great strengths of the Australian higher education system, and that's one of the reasons why we have been so successful for so long, and that we've been able to, over the last 25 years, provide increasingly higher quality and better education for our domestic students at the same time as expanding it more broadly. So, we're up to a 30-35% participation rate, is because of these international connections. So I see us continuing in that same vein. Australia is a small country. Just to give you a sense, 2% of the world's innovation is done in Australia, roughly. Now, don't get me wrong, it's bloody great innovation, okay? World class. but it's still small. We need to continue to be connected to the outside world so we get the best of the world's knowledge and bring it back to Australia. Similarly, I think, I can't remember who it was, maybe it was, whether it was Catriona or Margaret, told you the experience that our students have, being able to be global citizens, having different worldviews, all from being in a university campus. I mean, to give you a sense, we have roughly 30% international students on our campus. We send 35 to 40% of our Australian students overseas during the domestic Australian students during their time at university. So we've got about 70% of our kids have these, experiences that enable them to have different worldviews, which enable them to make connections, which enable them to drive export industries. I can't tell you the number of examples I have at my university where a student has met their business partner who happened to be an international student, or someone when they went overseas and travelled and have now started export businesses, which are great for Australia. That's what Australia needs. So to answer your question more simply, I don't see it growing or shrinking. I see it staying the same in some respects, but in a different way. We also have to recognise the new geopolitical challenge that we have. So again, we're working very closely with the government. We've got a whole lot of things around defence trade controls and foreign interference, which we're in lockstep with the government and also with security agencies to make sure that we do all the right things and have the rigorous risk assessments to give us the freedom to be able to continue to engage internationally, to bring all that wonderful knowledge back to Australia for Australia's benefit. And I see that happening in research, in the overall academic activity, and also in our students. Because again, Australian universities are almost unique in the world in just their international connectivity, which has done our society, a great service, and I think continue to do our society a great service into the future. It'll just be done in a very different way.
Okay, good, thank you. Margaret, academic model, I think you got the more difficult bit.
So I actually wanted to talk about that framing and the reason for the settings. Australia has been advantaged for a long period, and universities were the beneficiary of that, of a harmony between its foreign relations settings and its trade settings. And the level of geopolitical uncertainty and what I might call the turning inward of many countries around the world is actually very threatening to an open economy where Australia's trade and foreign relations have, as I said, had a mutually beneficial reinforcing space. So we are in a very challenging period for international settings. And this really does need serious attention, and the universities need to be seriously engaged with this, because we cannot, in my view, pretend that the thing that is essential to the quality of what we do, the free flow of knowledge and people across borders, is not being challenged. And so we actually have to remake our understandings of how essential that free flow is. And I think there are a series of elements to it. So in international education, if I talk about our academic model, yes, I think the academic model is going to become much more blended and actually have a higher proportion of online, which will bridge some of this engagement with the world more generally than it once did. My own university has campuses and in fact, as many of you will know, in many cases, an unusually large number of offshore campuses, all of them engaged in research and postgraduate education, not just undergraduate education, which is what makes them unusual. And we've got a campus in China, a campus in India, a campus in Malaysia. We are the first university to be approved for a campus in Indonesia. And we were already rethinking our education model to have two things, not just the education and research on those campuses, which form a network that builds links, a type of link into those economies and into those societies that is vital to how we maintain that international engagement and make it live. When we send our students out, we guaranteed all our first-year students in arts an international experience in their first year built into their degree. They went in cohorts to those campuses and those places to build that understanding. So we have a role in remaking those relationships and remaking them through our education, remaking those industry relationships through that research. we actually have shifted our model also to think about starting some of our international students intensively on those campuses first. And that is not just a response to the restricted flow of borders now. It's rethinking what the model is going to be and how important it is going to be part of those societies when that geopolitical uncertainty starts to shift the balance between open flow of borders, across borders, and we have to understand our way through that. I actually think that there's a really serious amount of thinking that has to go into this space to provide the right settings. The right settings are vital, and they're not just keeping the old settings because we're in a new place. But we have to empower our institutions to be part of that rethinking rather than sort of rolling around in the surf once the wave's dumped over. We'd like to be working with people to ride the top of the wave out.
Thank you, Margaret. Minister and Catriona, can I ask a question about research? It seems to me that with at least the near-term decline in international students, as many speakers have noted, that will take money out of research. With the increase in the number of students that will flow through if the current job package comes to fruition, it would appear to me, and certainly to some of the people posting questions, that will put pressure on research, and it's a bit unclear as to how you sustain the research effort within these changing circumstances. Minister, do you want to have first go at that, and then Catriona, you might want to comment as well, please. Minister, you're on mute. Thank you.
Very good question, Tim. And so one of the first things to understand about the changes in the Job Ready graduate package is that as well as aligning costs of course delivery with contribution both the student and government is making, we're also setting up a national industry linkage fund. There'll be $900 million which will go into that fund. A large component of that will go to into the STEM priority areas. So we're very conscious of the need for us to continue to keep investing in those linkages with industry, build work integrated learning, and ensure that we have students capable of building on the research which is undertaken at our university sector. But one of the real challenges that we're now facing is what we do to plug the hole that has been created by the decline in international students, because there has been cross-subsidisation from that very successful higher education export into our research capability. And that's why the government has set up the research working group with a number of Vice-Chancellors to have a look at, okay, what is the gap that we're seeing for next year? What is the gap that we potentially will see for the next 2 to 3 years, given the way that the student pipeline works? And we've had very good discussions with trying to get a sense of, okay, what do we need to do to plug the gap so that we can underpin and put ballast into our research capability of a nation? And then what do we need to do going forward to ensure that research capability? And one of the things that we're discussing is what do we need to do as a nation, because it's going to be crucial to how we come out of the pandemic, is to drive commercialisation and translation of our basic research. So, the government funding for our basic research capability at universities will continue and will continue to grow. But one of the challenges that we're going to face, and one of the things that we historically haven't been as strong at as we would have liked, is how you drive translation and commercialisation of that research. So that's one of the other key things we're looking at. So it's that, what do we need to do to plug the initial hole? And then what do we need to do to be able to grow our research capability, and in particular bring industry in and really drive translation and commercialisation?
Thank you, Minister. Catriona, would you like to contribute on this question of research, which is such a difficult one?
Absolutely, Tim. So you're absolutely right. There's a very significant gulf because of the border closures. Of those 21,000 jobs, we estimate about a third of those will be research positions. In terms of revenue hit, about 3.5 billion. These are big numbers. These are many people. In a strange way, we're in a real-time experiment right now watching research. I mean, I don't think research has ever been more visible. Researchers every day on television discussing how COVID is tracking in all sorts of ways, not just creating a vaccine, creating treatments, but all the sorts of extraordinary social impacts and terrible social impact it's having. So we're seeing research and the value of research right here, right now. The reason Australia is doing so well is partly because we have world-class researchers who can feed in, give really good advice to government, and government can then weigh that advice and make the appropriate decisions. So there is a strange irony in the fact that we are seeing research absolutely front and centre at a time when the revenue models underpinning research are under serious threat. About a decade ago, Australian universities contribute about a quarter of the money to fund Australia's research effort. Now Australian universities are contributing about a third of the money. So that just tells you the story. There are real issues for us to grapple with. It's very good to know that research working group is taking those issues very serious, and the Minister is closely involved, as are a number of other very senior people in the sector, including university leaders. But this is the most important question for our nation. Every dollar that goes into research comes out $5 the other end. If it's just money you care about, that's enough, surely. But it's also about the richness, the nature of the recovery we can have, the sort of country we want to live in. Without research, as I said before, we just can't have a decent recovery, a recovery that we would expect, Australians will expect.
Now thank you, Catriona. We have 4 minutes left, and I'm sure there are many questions about money in the list of questions. I'm not going to ask any of them because I just know we disagree. What I do want to ask is a question about that a number of people have asked about the way that we will help the international market, student market recover. It's interesting working in Canada, where their international student market appears to be growing at the moment, largely at the expense, it would appear, of the US, which has done such a poor job in terms of COVID. What do universities and the government need to be doing in order to help with the recovery of international student as rapidly as possible? Happy for anyone to jump in. And we have 3 minutes by the CEDA clock. Thank you. So your answers will need to be quick. Margaret, please, and you're on mute. Thank you.
The main thing is to actually use this time when that income is gone to get our domestic education funding and our research funding sustainable. The point about education costs is we actually need a system that has transparent research costs so that we actually understand what it costs to deliver at world-class excellence discovery research, because in fact, we haven't had to confront that because we've had this other growing revenue source. I think the important thing to be able to say to international students when they come back is your fees aren't the reason that we are able to do research and educate domestic students, and it is going to be important to reshape the message to them. And that's us getting our house in order around domestic education funding and funding, particularly for discovery research, to build those concentrations of excellence. And this is our opportunity, and that actually does need engagement and investment by government.
Minister, we have 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you to contribute to this as well.
Yeah, look, I think one of the things that we have been able to do, which I think will stand us in very good stead, is manage the pandemic. And from everything that I'm hearing and seeing, international students, the demand is still there. They want to resume their studies here, and we will see new growth from students want to come in here. Purely the way that we've been able to handle the pandemic. The other things which are critically as important, the quality of our education, it hasn't diminished. As a matter of fact, I would argue that it's even improved through the pandemic. Our ability now to educate online is first class. Our ability to offer a range of different options to international students, including now short courses and micro-credentials, which will be able to stack, I think enhances our education offering. The reforms that we're pushing through, which will enable a more seamless transition between vocational education providers and higher education providers, something that Attila touched on, because more and more into the future, students are going to want that mix and match between vocational and higher education. These are all things which stand our higher education sector in very good stead, and I think international students are going to want to continue to come here. We're already seeing from our online offerings that demand is there, and through visa applications that the demand's there. What we've got to do is hit the virus on the head, and I think we'll see the market resume, and I think we're even a stronger position to compete with other markets for international students.
Okay. It's 12:55, so it is time for us to draw it together. Thank you very much. During this Q&A, we have had a poll running, which the question being asked was, which is the best measure to ensure the sustainable cultural, societal and economic benefits of Australian higher education? I'm assuming this is in the order of 1,300 people, which I think would mean it's statistically significant. And you'll be perhaps not surprised to know that there's input required from the two key parties. So at 43.4%, and it seems like you only could have one choice, but 43.4%, the most important measure, reviewing business models and priorities of universities. So interestingly, of the people on this broadcast, there are strong opportunities in terms of how universities take their future in their hands. Secondly, Minister, strong government support and funding at 40.9%, so neck and neck. And then a long way behind, interestingly enough, repairing and sustaining international student flows at 11.8%, optimising technology to help delivery of training and education at 2.6%, and strengthening university research activities at 1.3%. So I think the participants in this video conference have concluded that the success of the higher education sector that we have seen to be so impressive over the last 3 decades is really going to depend primarily on the leadership of universities, who will be the ones thinking about business models and priorities, and the leadership of government. I'm assuming primarily Commonwealth government, but I would expect the state governments as well. And I think it's significant that each of you have expressed optimism. After 30 years of great success, to then drive into the pandemic and have the extraordinary downturn that the sector has experienced, the fact that you're optimistic either means you're fools, and I suspect that's relatively unlikely, or extremely confident in the capability of the sector to respond. And again, just to give you an international benchmark, it is the case that Australian universities feel far more empowered to respond and dynamically adapt to circumstances than the universities with which we've worked in the UK and Canada. And so I think that does give us cause for confidence. But I think to the point that a number of you made, they are not government entities, but they are statutory authorities, and the partnership between universities and government. And I think, as Attila, you've emphasised the increasingly important partnership between government and industry. And as Margaret, you've observed the partnerships between universities in Australia and internationally, and Catriona universities across Australia will become increasingly important. I think that theme of partnership might be one that we take forward in order to ensure that when we look back on this period in 5 years' time, we don't see that early 2020 was the peak of Australian higher education, but rather a cusp from which we learnt and moved forward. On behalf of CEDA and Nous Group and UniSuper, can I thank Minister Dan Tehan, Catriona Jackson from Universities Australia, Professor Margaret Gardner from Monash University, and Professor Attila Brungs, from UTS. And Clint, I think you would just like to do a little promo for the next things that CEDA will be bringing to Australia. Can I hand back to you? Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks very much, Tim, and thanks to all of our speakers and participants today. Wasn't planning on doing a quick close, Tim, but I'm very, very happy to. I really just wanted to direct the very large audience joining us today back to CEDA's website, www.ceda.com.au. You'll find there a full forward program of work and key discussions across sectors, and to keep you and your colleagues up to date on what's happening in the national economy. That's it for today. Thank you all for joining us, speakers, and to all of you around the country. Go well, take care, and I hope that we see you soon. Cheers.
Thanks, Clint.